This video will show you how to shade a sweet in pencil. Notice how dark my lines are, but they are for the purpose of seeing the lines on the video only. Your outline should be nice and faint. I've tilted my image and my drawing to make it easy to shade across the object in long strokes with the pencil. I'm holding my sharp pencil far away from the tip and I am shading across, deliberately going over the outlines. This gets a nice even coverage rather than doing little bits and it looking patchy, so don't worry if you go over the line. I'm starting out fairly light, lifting the pressure on my pencil when I get to the middle because that is the lightest area that I can see on the image. Then I'm going over in layers to build up the different tones. Keep your pencil lines close together for smooth shading. I'm now looking at the darkest areas on the image and I've noticed on that corner is much darker than everywhere else. So I'm applying more pressure on my pencil to create those darker tones. Keep looking at your image so that you can identify where the highlights, the shadows and the midtones are. Again, working across the shape so it looks nice and even. I've just started going in the opposite direction now and I'm following the contour, following the edge, curving my lines as I'm shading. This creates the effect of a rounded object. Using the tip of my pencil and holding it closer to the edge and applying more pressure will create the darker tones. You just keep building up the layers really carefully, looking at where it's dark and light, not applying the same amount of pressure everywhere, making sure that you're leaving some areas much lighter than others and applying more pressure where the darker areas are. Just using a rubber now to rub out the areas where I've shaded over the line to make it nice and tidy. A good tip would be to use a clean brush to wipe away any bits from the eraser or blow it away. Don't use your hand because you can end up smudging all that lovely shading that you've done. Picking out some more darker bits for good contrast, using the very point of a sharp pencil. Okay, this section that I'm shading now is the darkest part on the sweet. So plenty of pressure as you're shading this section, following the edge all the way around. Some areas much darker than others, so just make sure that you're not going too dark across the whole thing and lifting that pressure up a little bit. But compared to the rest of the suite, it is much darker. I'm now picking out areas that are really, really dark. I'm just adding a little bit more pressure on there and making it even darker in some bits. Especially on some of those edges. Just adding a few little bobbly bits around the edge so it's not as neat. As you can see on the image, it's not a perfect circle all the way around, or even an oval. And now I'm shading really lightly in that centre, holding my pencil as far away from the tip as possible. To smooth out the tones, you can use a blending stick or you can use some clean tissue. When you do blend, just be careful you don't overdo it, and start by blending the lightest areas. If you start in the darkest areas, all you'll do is spread that dark tone across the whole shape, and you'll end up with an area that is really dark all over. If you do go too dark, it's very easily fixable. You can always add a rubber and just erase, lift up some of the pencil a little bit to lighten it. I'm now blending some of the shading across the top section of the suite. Again, making sure I'm working on the lightest areas first. Picking out a few highlights with the eraser and making some areas darker. So it's all about adding tone in, taking bits away until you get the right balance. And now I'm starting to add some texture on top. It's nice to see some visible lines. It makes it look more realistic and less flat. So adding some dark lines on top. Continue to follow the contour because it's a rounded object. You want it to look curved. Just trying to get the balance now between the dark and light and good contrast. So I've realised from the image it needs to go much darker in some areas, so I'm just building up the tone. Better to go in layers than to go too dark too soon. And then I'm just picking up some little bits of texture in the centre of that suite. Just using the eraser there to lift up some highlights which are in the middle of the suite that can sometimes get a bit lost. And now I'm moving on to the shadow as the finishing part of my drawing, just rubbed out the outline. You should not have an outline around a shadow. Shade it in nice and dark, as close to the object as you can. And then you want to be going lighter away from that edge. Remember to go over the light outline and neaten it up at the end. I'm just making some areas a little bit darker on that edge. I've just rubbed out the edges there where I've gone over the edge, just neaten it up with a brush or blow away the eraser bits. And then the last stage is just to blend that a little bit. Remember to blend the shading from the lightest part first and then the darkest part. The very last stage of that shadow is just going over the areas you've blended by going even darker towards the edge with the pencil, and then that's the final stage. There's the finished drawing.